Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a software developer by learning to develop yourself, your skills, your network, and more. I'm Brian, your host. So what can you really expect as a software developer on the very first day of work? So about 10 years ago is when I started my very first day as a software developer, just like a little kid before the first day of school, except I was 30 with like 2 kids already, and I was a grown man trying to start my life over again. So I was super nervous. Back then, the internet was not just littered with stories about what to expect on the first day or, what it was really like to be a software engineer. And surprisingly, even 10 years later, there's still not a lot of great information about what do you actually do. It's like, yeah, coding is a big part of it, but what about all the other stuff? So maybe you are learning to code, maybe you're getting ready for your first day, maybe you're already in your first day, maybe you're starting a new job. I think this story is going to help you understand what is actually expected in that first day, month, week on the job, how you can prepare best for those times, and a little bit about the life of software developers, because too often we get sidetracked by what we see on Instagram or TikTok and think the big bag, the chill schedule, just work remote. And that is experience for some, but that was not my experience in the beginning at all. So the way mine started out was it was the night before my birthday, and my family had just left town for a short vacation in Lake Tahoe. I had been studying like feverishly for 2 weeks before this. I got hired and I was like, oh my God, I quit my job. I was, just had been sober also for like about a year. And I was unsure and really nervous. I didn't know what the hell to expect. The manager mentioned C#, SQL, and JavaScript. I kind of knew JavaScript. I bought a Udemy course for C# and SQL. And when I went through them, it just got me more confused. I hate to even admit this. I bought a big old book, like a big book on C#. And I just was like reading this book and it just was getting me more and more confused. And I was like, how do I learn this stuff? What's going to happen? Am I going to get fired on the very first day? I was like mostly self-taught at this point. I hadn't even finished the boot camp that I enrolled in before I got hired. So here I was the night before, about to start my new job, my new life, and I had no clue. And I'm like, what a way to start. Am I going to get freaking fired on my birthday? Am I going to walk in there? And are they just going to hand me some assignments and just see how it goes? How many questions should I ask? Is it too soon to ask questions? What do they expect? I don't know. I have no clue. I felt like this a few times, actually. Even after my second and third job, I was thinking, oh, what's going to happen at this one? Am I going to walk in? Are they going to just start, pounding me with different stuff to do? And that can be the reality. In general, though, I think my experience is more like the experience that you are going to have. And at Parsity, we actually just finished up a very brief internship. We're going to do another one. And they're interesting because you kind of are doing a trial by fire type of experience where you're coming in to, a small place typically that's saying, hey, here's a project. You kind of figured out you may be the only software engineer on site. And that can be a bit stressful because then you really are like the first and last line of defense. In most teams, though, I started on mostly a small team. I've worked on mostly small teams throughout my career. And the onboarding experience that I had here is pretty much like what I think you can expect. So I showed up prepared to be fired, basically. I was like, okay, well, hey, you know what? I switched careers. I started a new life. Worst case scenario, I got to start over again. I'm already broke. What does it matter, right? I wasn't like I was balling out here or quitting some high paid gig. I was like, I have nothing to lose. Spoiler alert, I didn't get fired that first day. I've gone through this first day experience, 5 times since then, even more with the contracts I've done. And most people I've spoken to have had a similar experience as well. And at this point, I've gotten all the way up to engineering manager, and I fully understand how it feels on that first day. And I try to be aware of that and try to make people feel at ease when they come in. And honestly, most places for the first 30 days, you don't have a whole lot of expectations besides not to break too much stuff. So if maybe you're out there thinking, what the hell is going to happen to you when you go on there? And they know at this point, once you're hired, they know you're some level of junior if they've at all interviewed you, and they have their expectations appropriately set, right? You don't hire a junior and say, hey, come on in here and, do some mission critical thing because they know you're going to just break stuff, right? So I spent every first day at a new job doing one thing, which is just getting set up. Means going to your workstation, getting your computer, usually in the mail or at the office site, and then setting up all the different things you need to set up, all the boring junk, email, the dev tools, VS Code, depending on the complexity of the app. I try to get a local version running on my machine. So they'll give you access to the code base. You'll clone it, and then you will try to get it running. And that's not likely going to happen the first day. At this point, everything is a black box. Common phrase in software development, black box, meaning this is a unknown thing. So I'm looking into something and I have zero clue how it works, and I'm unsure of how things are related. I don't really know what the code is supposed to do or how this app even works. That's totally okay. In fact, that's expected. Depending on the complexity of the app, like if you're at a massive place like Google, it could take 6 months. I was at a very complex startup that took 6 months to a year typically to onboard somebody. They said for me, the expectation was about a year in, I should have a very strong familiarity with the system. That was 1 year to get familiar with the system because it was fairly complex. I'm a big believer in writing things down. So usually on the first day, I'll write down all the questions I want to ask to a teammate about a process or things that are unclear. You want to ask as many questions as you can at this stage, because right now people have the most tolerance for you that they'll have in your entire career there. In the time you spend there, if you're there for 6 months and you ask how the hot potato service works on day 120, they're going to look at you a lot funnier than if you ask it on day one. On day one, they're like, oh, I'm happy to tell you. On day 120, they're thinking, wait, you don't know that yet? Why don't you know that yet? Why didn't you ask this earlier? Also, hot pro tip here. If you are new to a job and it's an in-person one, bring a notebook. Even if you don't use it that much, it makes you look like you're engaged. And if you have it, you will be engaged because you'll likely be writing stuff down. And writing stuff down is the quickest way to internalize it and memorize it, much better than typing things into your phone or just typing things into a laptop, which is a much more passive activity. Writing things down in a journal or a notebook is a skill that I've taken everywhere I've gone, and I took that from a smarter developer that encouraged me to do it. Excellent, excellent piece of advice. It's something that I've done to this day. So during that first week, in between all the administrative tasks like setting up things and going to healthcare, finding where the bathroom is, you'll probably also be writing some code, right? Usually one of the first tasks I've been assigned is fairly trivial, and there's not much expectation or urgency around it. So some examples I've been assigned, like change the color of a button. The wrong property is being passed to a function. Add some text to a page. These are super, super common. It'd be really weird if they say, hey, how about you update a column in a SQL database if you're a junior, because the threshold for that to go wrong is high, right? So they wouldn't want to give you things where you have the potential to have something very, very bad happen. The tasks are supposed to introduce you to the team's processes for writing code. So your code will likely go through a code review, where another developer will let you know of any issues in the code or styling changes you need to make. This is a very, very typical process. In fact, this is why we do something similar at Parsity. When students write code and they submit it, we have our eval grader look at it and then offer suggestions on their code. It's just kind of like what you're going to have happen in real life, quote unquote. Like when you're at a company writing code, it's not just you just ship it. You're like, hey, I'm done with the code. Boom, let's put it out. It has to go through a series of reviews, and that was a big shocker for me, coming from a self-taught background. And the matter-of-fact style that people use to critique code can feel really cold and intimidating. I got really personally attached to my code, and my advice to you out there or to my former self would be, welcome to code reviews. Critical reviews should teach you how to write good code. Some people are jerks, and you need to be able to separate their jerkiness from what they said in the code. And some people don't know how to do code reviews. So don't assume that because the person is reviewing your code has worked for 10 years, that they know significantly more than you. You'd be shocked how many people have basically been living or writing code the same way for 10 years and haven't actually progressed in their career. So do your best to not be overwhelmed by people's titles. Like people meet me and, I have the title engineering manager. What does that mean? Do you know how I got it? Do you know what I've had to do to get it? Maybe I just got it by luck. Maybe I just slipped and fell into the title. Maybe it means a different thing here than it means somewhere else. Any one of those things can be true. So try to judge the person based on what you see, not on their title, and try to separate yourself from the advice they give you. But code reviews can be really weird because you're having somebody look line through your code and saying, I would do it this way. I would do it this way. And the more you can ask questions and be involved in that process, the better you're going to be, and the more respect you're going to get from your teammates, rather than just saying, yes, 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 whatever you say. And there's ways to do this. And it is really interesting how code reviews can become an interesting part of the engineering culture in like every company because they're so different how people do them and they can be emotional. But anyway, that was one of the biggest shockers I learned from getting on a team was how much like back and forth there'd be on changing code. So every team I've joined also has this thing, morning stand-ups. And this was really confusing for me. So basically everybody gathers around in the morning and the team lead or the manager, they say, hey, what did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? Do you have anything that's blocking you? It's a short, should be short thing where they'll ask you to stand up or like literally you're sitting, but it's called stand up and you'll say what you did. And it's kind of pointless, but it can be helpful if you don't really talk to your teammates too often to hear what they're working on. If anything's blocking them, they might say, I was working on ticket, 1, 2, 3, 4 yesterday, and then I got kind of close to fixing it. I think it'll be resolved by tomorrow. And I'm being blocked by this other service that isn't quite working. And then somebody else might say, I can help you out. And that's ideally how it goes. In reality, how it goes is it's just kind of like, you're just going through the motions. I'll be honest. A lot of people hate doing stand-up. It is a fact of life, and you're going to deal with it at some point in your developer career. So this is the period where, again, you should be asking all these questions about how the code works. A good rule of thumb is to spend about 15 to 30 minutes researching a question until you ask a teammate for help. So that is where I see most juniors tend to kind of fail at this. They'll sit around maybe for a day, maybe a week I've seen, and not know how to get something done. And they're just too afraid to admit it, especially if they're remote. So people that are remote have even more trouble, I think, understanding when it's appropriate to ask for help, or even thinking, can I ever ask for help? And yes, you should be asking for help, especially in the beginning. One good way to do it, if you're remote, like many of us are, is to hit somebody on Slack or whatever messaging service you use, which is Slack or Teams, almost without a doubt, and say, hey, if you're not too busy, do you mind if we can take a look at this particular issue? An unspoken rule on most teams is that if a person has their earphones on, you probably don't want to disturb them within reason. If that person's the only person that can get you unstuck, you got to bother them. And for many of your teammates, your questions may seem trivial and they'll explain them really quickly and they'll forget all the years of experience they've had. And I've done this myself. I'm like, oh yeah, you just do this. And I realized, wait a second, that wasn't the right answer. The right answer was to tell them, how did I know that this was simple to do? I have many years of experience behind me now that made this thing seem trivial. I know it's not trivial to them, and I have to keep aware of that. So don't let them off the hook too easily. You need to press them. If things are confusing, you say, wait a second, how did you know how to do that? I don't just want the answer. I want to know how you got to the answer. Because if you just get the answers, that's going to lead you to being a copy-paste cowboy, cowgirl coder, a person that doesn't really understand what you're doing. You're just getting stuff done, and that'll get you by for at least a couple years. But you want to be good at what you do. So in that first month, your first month is kind of like your first day. You're living your first day a few times, kind of like Groundhog Day. You're going over that first day a few times. Now, in this period, I was kind of thinking, am I going to get fired? They gave me a bug that I had to finish by the end of the month. I was really neurotic. I was like thinking, am I doing good? Am I not doing good? I had to talk with the manager. They said, hey, here's like your expectations for the first 30 days, 90 days, half a year. And I'm thinking, oh man, okay. And I'm like freaking out because I'm thinking, I don't think I can do any of this stuff right now. But by the end of the first month, I had a decent understanding of processes like code reviews, how to get my code from my machine into the live site. I had a decent, very, very loose grip on this kind of thing. It took me about half a year before I started making significant contributions to the team. I think that is totally normal. I think even up to a year can feel normal. And by the way, I didn't feel really confident until about a solid year into that first job. Do I think that's normal? No. Do I think it's abnormal? Also, no. I've seen people take at least 3 months to feel okay. I've seen some people take a year to feel okay. I've seen a lot of people take around 6 months to start feeling like, okay, I feel all right on the team. I feel like I can kind of do some things. I'm not too much of a burden at this point. And I'll be very honest. When you first start a team and you're junior, you're a bit of a burden. That's the cost of hiring juniors. They need way more handholding. And you may be wondering, why the hell do people hire juniors in the first place? First of all, seniors are incredibly expensive to hire. They typically don't last very long because they're in high demand. And so you can waste a lot of money on one if you don't have tasks that require seniors. If you say, you know what, we're willing to take a little bit of a gamble on a couple juniors, and if we train them and they stay here, well, guess what? We got mid-level developers that we paid for at a junior price. So it's a very economical decision to do, and it can work out in your favor the longer they stay. The longer they stay, their salaries typically won't keep up with their title, if that makes sense. So if they went to another company as a senior, their salary would increase dramatically. If they stayed there and got the annual 3%, 5% increase, well, then guess what? You've got a crazy deal on senior level talent that just didn't leave. On a totally other side note, I suggest that if you do stay at a company beyond 2 to 3 years in your first job, you're likely losing a lot of money, and you should not be doing that. Okay, so now you've gotten through the first month, and you may be thinking, what's next? And so that time is when you're just keeping your head above water. You're going to need a little bit of blind faith in your abilities and know that one day you will be a regularly contributing member on the team. And the few people I've seen do really terrible during this period are the ones who just don't ask questions. They don't write anything down. They don't admit when they're stuck. They just suffer in silence. They're perpetually late. And then they just kind of leave or they're let go. I'll be honest, I've never actually seen somebody fired from a team during this early stage, but I have seen people leave after not hacking it. And I have unfortunately seen people get asked to leave, a year in. And that is a really sad situation to be in. So the more engaged you are, the more you're out there asking those questions, doing the difficult job of exposing things that you don't know early on, the more people are going to respect you and the easier it's going to get for you later on. I hope this was helpful for you. And if you're up the night before or you're the day of driving to your first day of work as a software developer, don't trip. You got this. And if you're not yet a software developer and you want to learn, then, obviously join us at Parsity.io. And if you don't know how to write JavaScript at all, you don't know how to write a for loop, then go to dev30.xyz, join us there, learn JavaScript, kill it there, get your first job. Don't be a neurotic weirdo like me. See you around. That'll do it for today's episode of the Develop Yourself podcast. To learn more about becoming a software engineer with us, then check out Parsity.io. If you're not quite ready for that, then jump into our dev30.xyz program, which is 30 days of working on your mindset, habits, and JavaScript skills. Totally worth it. See you next week.